Hey everybody, it's your old pal Mike. I hope you're happy, healthy, and safe, and welcome back to the channel. Boy, my hair has stopped being Al Borland and has transitioned fully into teenage Simba from The Lion King. So I've got the Hakuna Matata thing going on. In my mind, there are few ways better for learning the ropes of what it's like being a guitar tech than by building your own parts caster. Parts caster? Parts master? Thank you, Brian Ray. No matter what you want to call them, guitars are actually a great way to become familiar with all the things you need to think about when it comes to setting up, repairing, modifying your own guitars. And when it comes to building a parts guitar, I often recommend that people start with something a little bit more familiar and middle of the road, like a Stratocaster or a Telecaster, because I think we can all agree that it's pretty hard to mess up a Tele. On a Telecaster, it's relatively simple to figure out your string path, you know, the way the strings flow from the tuners to the bridge, because everything's kind of taken care of for you. With most parts manufacturers, the screw pattern for the bridge is preset and pre-drilled. The bridge pickup is mounted to the very same plate as the saddles, so you don't have to worry about alignment so much. Even the pickguard fits, you know, fairly snugly around the bridge and around the neck, so that's kind of taken care of for you. When I think about it, the only thing you have to think about with a Telecaster is the control plate, but again, just make that parallel with the bridge and you're set. But when it comes to parts masters, jazz masters, Jaguars, offset guitars in general, I don't recommend that most people start there, especially if it's their first time. And the reason being, oh my God, there's so much going on with these guitars. You've got switches and plates and vibratos separated from bridges. You've got all kinds of setup things that you need to know to get the most out of your offset guitar. So for today's video, I want to take a moment and just discuss some things that I think you need to be aware of if you're going to build your own parts Jazzmaster or Jaguar from a single manufacturer or even disparate parts manufacturers. And hopefully at the end of the video, you'll feel a little bit more confident about the things that can certainly surprise you as you're working on one of these. As for general Jazzmaster and Jaguar setup, I'm not going to go into that in this video because I have exhaustively gone over it in so many other videos and blog posts and magazine articles. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what you need to get the most out of your Jazzmaster or Jaguar, I would like to refer you to my May 2017 Premier Guitar cover story on this very topic, as well as a series called Demystifying that you can find over at mmguitarbar.com. Links in the description down below. And if you're feeling curious, there are also links in the description to my Patreon. So if you're curious in finding out how you too can support the channel, please click the link in the description down below. Please, I'm begging you. To begin, the first thing I'd like to call your attention to when it comes to building a parts Jazzmaster or a Jaguar is that unfortunately almost every manufacturer on the planet is using a slightly different template, and that can spell disaster when it comes to having a relaxing and problem-free build. Now, if you weren't aware, the Fender US body shape, that's for both vintage and reissue, is actually very different from what you see on Japanese guitars. And it's perhaps easiest to notice this when it comes down to the shape of the pickguard. I've got a few here. Let me show you what I mean. Now here in my hand, I've got a custom shop anodized gold guard. I've got a Japanese all parts guard. Now this is supposed to fit 62 reissue, but it clearly only fits Japanese, and I'll explain why in a moment. And I've got a kick-ass deco boom that I have been meaning to use for so long, and this is made to AVRI 62 vintage reissue specs. Now, when I put one on top of the other, a few things should stick out to you. For one, you've got a little bit sharper of a horn on the Japanese style guard, and the control area is bulbous. We'll call it bulbous. And if I turn them around, even more things start to poke out at you, like this line right here. Yes, the American body shape does extend just a little bit farther than what the Japanese guard allows. So if you put a Japanese guard on a US body, you're going to have alignment and perhaps fit issues. And I'm happy to admit that this is actually one of the tells for when I'm looking at a parts guitar. It is so plainly obvious to me when I look at a guitar that's hanging in a shop and it's supposed to be all original or it's supposed to be a quality build. And sometimes I just look at how the guard sits on the body and I'm like, how could they not see it? Like, it's so disappointing to me. And it is one of the ways that I know exactly what I'm looking at. Now, this may not bother you, and if it doesn't, that's okay. I'm not here to criticize your artistic choices. I'm just saying it's something that we should all be thinking about when we're building these guitars, because we want the best possible fit, the best possible experience, and, you know, I just think it looks better when you've got the right parts on the right guitar. So all I'm saying is just be aware. There are also potential alignment issues that you may end up with if you're using a Japanese guard on an American body, or vice versa. For one, the placement of the bridge thimbles, those are the body inserts on Jazzmasters and Jaguars, well, that location can vary between vintage, reissue, and Japanese guitars. Looking at the pickguards I have here, you'll notice that while the neck pocket is perfectly aligned, the bridge cutouts for the US spec guards line up, but the Japanese guard is a little bit further back. You'll also note that the locations for the rhythm circuit controls, the pickups, the toggle switch location, even the output jack, none of those quite line up the same way. Even the screw pattern on the perimeter of the guard is a little bit different, which I totally expect for using parts from different sources, but it's worth noting all the same. I also want to point out that Warmoth, a company that I dearly love, has moved the Jazzmaster bridge pickup like half an inch or something closer to the neck, which can cause some frustration when you're using aftermarket pickguards. So you'll either have to route the body for the vintage correct pickup position, or, well, you'll just need to use a Warmoth pickguard. But US versus import body template issues are not only limited to the shape of the pickguard and how they fit on the body, this also comes into play when it comes to the vibrato itself. Any guitar that uses the Japanese body template, even including Fender MIJ and CIJ guitars, simply will not accept AVRI or US hardware without some modification. The route in the body is just a little bit undersized for the US vibrato. Now, if you're using a Mastery, that may not come into play because the Mastery vibrato's internals are a little bit undersized on purpose so that they have a universal fit. But when it comes to the AVRI 62 vibrato and even the Descendant vibrato that I installed on this gorgeous Lilac Jazzmaster, well, I had to remove material from the vibrato cavity. This is sadly something that I've had to do on so many Parts Masters over the years, so I'd like to put out a gentle request to my good friends in the parts guitar industry. Please make your vibrato routes just a little bit bigger. I am so tired. Please, do it for your old pal Mike. But if you find yourself with a parts body and the vibrato doesn't fit, there's really no other option. You can get away with just using some coarse sandpaper and doing it by hand. I have done many times on my own. But it really does help to either use a router and a proper template or to just do it by hand with a Dremel, which is what I did to the Lilac body, and also what I had to do to this very guitar in front of me. Now, I'm not ashamed to say that this body, of course I'm not ashamed, it fucking rules. Now, this body comes from Guitar Mill, aka Mario Guitars, and they did a bang-up job on this. This Coke bottle finish could not be better, and I am so pleased with the way this thing looks. And in fact, it actually perfectly matches this Coke bottle I have here, so well done. Now, Guitar Mill specifically patterned their Jaguar body off of a 1964 model, which meant that more or less I could reasonably expect everything that I was going to use to fit on here perfectly without issue. However, the problem I ran into with the vibrato route on this one wasn't because of the shape of the route, it was because the sparkle finish, well, they're just so much thicker than most normal finishes. Simply put, the amount of sparkle that you need to build up in a finish like this when you're going after this kind of beautiful depth and reflection and refraction or whatever the hell it is, well, you know, that can build up. And so I did have to remove, gently, some of the finish in the cavity here. I didn't overdo it, and I didn't really have to adjust the shape of the route at all. It was just a matter of having an excessive amount of green sparkle all over the place. Otherwise, my experiences with Guitar Mill in the past have been great. I have not needed to adjust the routes at all. I just wanted to mention that in case you, like me, are afflicted with an overwhelming love of sparkle finishes. You may also have to deal with this yourself. I think I might be part raccoon. I just get lost when I start looking at shiny things. This is the rest of my afternoon. The next thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that test fitting is absolutely crucial when it comes to building a parts guitar. Before you make a move, before you drill any holes, and by God, before you get stuck on a look, I want you to take all of your parts and just lay them on the body and have a good long think about them. And the reason for that is that when you're ordering parts from many manufacturers, or sometimes even the same manufacturer, depending on who it is, you can end up with things that don't quite line up. And that's normal. That is a thing that you're going to have to accept and prepare for as you're going along with your parts build. So when somebody comes over and they drop off a gigantic box of parts, that's the first thing I do. I will take everything out. I will examine the parts to make sure that they are ready to be installed. Sometimes they might need a little adjustment, but I will lay them on the body and just look at them. And I will make notes, either mental or pictorial, in my phone, and just pay attention to the way the pickguard, the plates, the vibrato, everything kind of sits on the body, especially this area right here. Now, I mentioned before that Japanese and American guards are different and sit on the body a little bit differently, and that's okay. But even when it comes to like AVRI or vintage Fender spec guards, there will always be a little bit of variation. So put everything on the body, line it all up, and pay attention to the way that everything flows along with the lines of the body. In fact, when I'm test fitting, I like to tape down the pickguard so that I can fit all of the other parts to it. And this comes in handy especially when it comes to Jaguars, what with the self-contained control plates that are located on the body. I will not lie to you, they never line up. I have never worked on a parts Jaguar where everything fit the first time perfectly. Now, that may not be the case for everybody else, and it may not be the case that everybody else is keyed in to plate fit as I might be. That's perfectly fine. But, you know, even when it came to my own guitar here, oh, I spent a lot of time figuring out how these parts were going to sit in the body. And in fact, I had to grind down this plate right here to make sure that it didn't stick out into the negative space of the body. Take a look at what I'm talking about. Now, it's true that the plate fit on even vintage 1960s Fenders could sometimes be a little bit off. But when it comes to my own guitars, I was immediately bothered by the way this plate was sitting on the body. So I used a belt sander to grind off this edge right here on the treble side of the plate to make sure that it not only fit up against the guard nicely so that no Coke bottle sparkle was poking out in the gap between them, but also to ensure that the output jack area wasn't sticking out into the oblivion, the negative space of the body, because that looked so incredibly wrong to me. Even the rhythm circuit control plate didn't quite line up the first time, and I had to really work with it using a little bit of sandpaper and a little bit of razor blading of the guard itself just to make sure that everything was snug. And this may not even be something that you care about, but when it comes to building a parts guitar and doing your best job, it does pay to just take a little extra time and make sure everything is lined up. So when it comes to lining everything up on the body, how do I do that? Well, the good news is that you've already got two things located for you on most aftermarket bodies. Number one, you've got the neck. Now, you may indeed experience some fit issues with necks and bodies ordered from different manufacturers, either because the neck is too wide for the pocket, or maybe they used a lot of finish and you need to remove some of that. But that's to be expected with literally any parts build, not just Jazzmasters and Jaguars. Just be aware that that's definitely a thing. But once you've got the neck in its pocket, that's pretty much it. As long as you've got a good tight fit, you shouldn't have to worry too much about string alignment. So that's there for you. The second thing that's already taken care of for you on most aftermarket bodies are the locations of the bridge thimbles. On most aftermarket bodies, the thimble locations are already pre-drilled, although you may also deal with some fit issues there. Either the holes will be slightly undersized as they were on the MJT Lilac body, or as was the case with this wonderful Sparkle body, there was just a lot of finish down in there that I had to get rid of using the drill press. So you've got those two things going for you, but when it comes to the vibrato, those can be a little bit difficult to line up. So how do I do that? Well, I pull out my old friend, yarn. This is yarn that I got from a Bigsby vibrato kit. I've had this in my parts drawer for years, and I don't know if you're seeing it on camera, but it's, you know, it's a nice long piece of red yarn. So to locate the vibrato, to line up the neck and the bridge and make sure everything is the way I want it, I thread this through the E-string holes in the vibrato, and I essentially string the guitar up with yarn. And because it's red, there's no chance of me losing it on the body. I can see clearly how every component is lining up, and that goes for the pickups, that goes for the pickguard, that goes especially for the vibrato. And you definitely want your vibrato to be as well aligned as possible for a number of reasons. Number one, straight or as straight as possible string pull is crucial for tuning stability. And no matter what bridge you're using, whether it's a mastery, the stock bridge, a stay trem, a halon, anything, you are going to want those strings to flow as naturally from terminus to tuner as possible. Otherwise, any lateral pull from the strings could make it a nightmare to keep your bridge aligned. On offset guitars, the vibrato arm sticks up between the plain B and E strings, and if you're not careful with positioning, you can introduce some rub, and you'll actually hear it when you're actuating the vibrato. String your guitar up with brightly colored yarn, string it as if you were stringing the outer E strings in your guitar, and just have a look at how everything is lined up. Once you have everything lined up, then you can start marking screw locations. And if you've got another Jaguar around that you want a pattern off of, it can be helpful to make a quick template of your own. In fact, I made one of my own out of computer paper because I just wanted to make sure that my outer screw locations were lined up correctly. Now, doing so did require me using yarn because the vibrato route on this body was just a little bit oversized, which is a good thing. But that means that, you know, there's a little bit of lateral movement involved, and I wanted to make sure that everything was perfect. So once I had those outer screw locations marked with a Sharpie, I tested them to make sure that they were dead on, and I actually had to move them just a little bit over toward the treble side for proper alignment. So now you've got everything right where you want it. All of the lines are flowing, everything looks lined up properly, your string path is good. What next? Well, the first thing I like to do is I like to tape everything down using some low-tack tape. This blue stuff works, you know, painter's tape, but I still like to de-tack it a little bit just by putting it on my pants and ripping up, and that way I don't have to worry about pulling any finish with it, especially on finishes that are quickly applied or are aged. For example, that lilac MJT body, that finish just flaked off no matter what I did. I breathed on it once, and a little bit of purple just went right into the wind. So be careful with tape, especially on aged finishes. On this sparkle finish, this ain't going anywhere. I'm probably never going to wear this down. So using tape, I will simply tape everything right into place where I want it, and I make sure that it doesn't move while I'm undertaking the next step. And that next step is using a center hole punch to locate all of my screw holes. This is just one of those hole punches you can get from a hardware store that's spring-loaded. When you press down on it, it clicks down into place, leaving a nice little impression for your drill bit to follow. So this thing came in handy when I was locating everything, and once I had my holes set, it was a thoughtless exercise to line them up on the drill press and make sure that I was drilling perfectly centered holes every time. Now, if you've got a steady hand, you can absolutely do this using a hand drill. Just make sure you've got the drill perfectly perpendicular with the body. And yes, I did have to think about that word. Just make sure you're drilling perpendicular with the body, that you're keeping everything level, and you should be fine. But if you've got access to a drill press like the one behind me, it will help you get your depths worked out, it will help you be consistent, and I highly, highly recommend that. But like I said, a hand drill can work just fine. Can I get a what? Give me that towel. I need to wipe my eyes again. That was so stupid. Oh, I can't believe I'm having fun for the first time in my life. So now you've got everything lined up, you've got your holes drilled, you're putting screws into the body, you're wiring up your guitar, you're excited, you're looking forward to it. And then comes the last part of the process. Strumming for the first time. And I know this is an entirely psychological response, but it's important to understand that while you may be very excited about your freshly finished parts caster, parts master, whatever, Brian Ray, but it's worth noting your excitement level as you work, as you proceed through the build, because even if the guitar is very good, and I think this guitar is very good, you can also be setting yourself up for a little bit of disappointment. Now, before I talk about disappointment, I want you to know that if you've completed a parts caster build of your own, you should be immensely proud of yourself, because it takes a lot of perseverance, it takes skill, it takes know-how. Sometimes it's a really difficult project, and you should feel really good about what you've done with your own hands. But it's also worth noting that sometimes disappointment can creep in. Maybe a few days after the build, you start noticing that the guitar looks a little bit shoddy, or that some plates aren't lined up the way that you'd like. And I want you to know that that's okay, and you can always go back, realign, reevaluate, build it right the next time. And, you should be taking this as a learning opportunity. If all of a sudden you're starting to see things about your build that don't quite look the way that you wanted them to, well, make notes about that. Learn from it. Improve. Excelsior! Onward and upward, I say. But maybe the guitar actually looks really good, but the problem is that going from a box of parts to a completed instrument, the thing is a little heavier than you expected. That can be a source of disappointment, but it's okay, because you can always drill out under the pickguard, you can weight relieve a body, or you can even start over with another project. I know some places like Guitar Mill in particular offer a slight upcharge for a body that is under a certain amount of weight, something like under 5 pounds, which, now that this guitar is completed, it is a little heavier than I expected. I will be completely upfront with you. I'm gonna live because, believe it or not, it's lighter than Pancake. So, this isn't so far out of the realm of possibility. And also, Jaguars are just so much heavier usually. I mean, all of these plates, all of the metal parts, that definitely adds up. But maybe the guitar looks great and it feels great. It's the right weight for you, but you take that first strum and you don't really like the sound. I am very happy with this guitar. I don't want to imply that I'm disappointed in it at all, but that first strum for me was a little weird, because I'm so used to playing my own guitars and what they sound like that this, I was just meeting it for the first time. And, if you think about it, this body has never been a guitar before. This body is completely new to being an instrument, and so it makes sense that the guitar that you just built is going to take time to settle in, to adjust to being an instrument, to adjust to the adjustments that you've made, and it may need more adjustments down the line. I will say, in the few days that I have had this guitar completed as a playable instrument, it has opened up profoundly. It has gone from feeling like a brand new piece of wood to feeling more and more and more like an instrument I can be proud of. So understand that first impression, well, sometimes they're deceiving. Sometimes they don't tell you the whole story, and it's going to take a little while for that guitar to reveal its personality, much like a rescue animal. But maybe you've been lucky, and you've made the best instrument you have ever played in your life, and if that's the case, good going. And I would hope that that's the way it works out for everybody, and especially if you've put in the time and effort to make a guitar out of parts, well, I mean, there's no better feeling than finishing that project. Even if you're a little bit disappointed, I mean, I've been looking at this the last few days and going like, wow, I can't believe I made this myself. Even though I have worked on instruments that cost more than houses. Like, this is my favorite thing right now. So, parts guitars can indeed be a rewarding experience, and I hope that it is that way for you. Now, there is one last wrinkle that I want to draw your attention to, and that is if you have simply acquired the parts and you're planning on having a tech build it for you, understand that that is going to be a significant portion of the cost of this instrument. And there's a good reason for that. I mean, most techs have a bunch of experience in this kind of thing and will more readily anticipate all of the issues that I talked about in this video so that you don't have to worry about it. You're paying for this convenience, and that is money well spent, in my opinion, as a tech myself. Now, I'm not ashamed to say that I am reasonably expensive. We'll call it. At least I think it's very reasonable because my time costs money. And you know what? So does yours. So even if you are planning on building the guitar itself, you should really account for your time. Keep track of all of your hours and how long it took you to do every part of the job, and then tally it all up at the end and be astounded And at the end of the day, when you wrap a tech's fees into the cost of the components and everything, you may indeed end up with an instrument that rivals the price of a ready-made instrument off the shelf by one of the big brands. But, and that's a big but we all know that building a parts guitar, it really isn't about the money anyway, because yeah, you could go buy a $500 guitar, or you could spend a little bit more money on quality parts on a guitar that is perfectly spec'd for your needs. Hardware, pickups, finish, neck shape, all of that stuff. Those are all things that you can choose for yourself. So it pays, and you pay, for the guitar of your dreams. And that's really what it's about. It's about making something that fits you perfectly. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. I do hope it's been helpful and informative for those of you who are currently or have in the past or are thinking about doing a parts build of your own. And I also hope that it assuages some of your doubts and fears that might be keeping you from taking that next step. I absolutely encourage you to dive in on building a parts guitar. But when it comes to Jazzmaster and Jaguar type guitars, be aware there's some things you need to think about. In any case, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate you coming back to the channel again and again, for liking, for sharing, for commenting, for subscribing, for doing all of that good stuff that keeps the algorithm happy. And you know we want to keep the algorithm happy, lest it becomes Skynet and we all find our bleached skulls trampled into the dirt by a T-800 robot. All right, I've got some playing to do on my cool new Sparkle Jaguar. I'm so excited about this thing. I cannot wait to spend more time with it, so I'm gonna go do that. But in the meantime, I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you in the next video.